architects, engineers, and craftsmen of Reddit what wishes of customers you had to refuse because they defy basic rules of physics and/or common sense. Story 1. I got to watch this gem of an email chain over the course of a few days last year. I'm glad it wasn't me. I'm not sure I could have remained as professional as my colleague. Paraphrase to protect the innocent contractor. Hey, the inspector failed my work because I didn't construct this per your detail. Can you remove that detail from the plan? Thanks. Engineer, that was needed because of the anticipated load the owner will put there after construction. Contractor, but we didn't do it that way. So can you just pull the detail and tell the owner not to put the load there? Great, thanks, engineer. No. Contractor, why are you being so unreasonable? The inspector won't give us a pass until you remove the detail. We've already finished the construction. At this point, the office manager stepped in. OM, sounds like you need to get out there. Any restart construction. Contractor, but that would be really expensive. It would just be easier for us if you changed the plans and the contract documents, so we didn't have to do that. OM, well, maybe you should have followed engineers' plans in the first place. We're forwarding this email chain to owner. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your new, delayed schedule before work complete. Story 2. Rich couple just bought a fancy new place and brought in a fairly well-known interior designer decorator. Dude walks into the living room, and the first thing he says is, OMG, this place is just perfect for a fireplace. You must get one build right here. Couple agrees because they have more money than sense and will agree with anything as long as they think someone has some level of authority or knowledge. Problem is, the place they bought is an apartment. On the 4th floor, there were 6 floors in total. There is literally no way to put a fireplace into this apartment without making massive structural alterations to the building. And I do mean massive. They couldn't even get a price estimate from any contractor because the work required to figure out the structural alterations was extensive enough to require a price estimate in itself. Story 3. What do you mean you can't cut 60 of the weight out of this design while maintaining the existing 6x factor of safety? And since you're making it lighter, it should be less expensive too. Story 4. Not an engineer, but I used to work on a project which allocated funding for budding entrepreneurs with good ideas for projects. I had one guy who was adamant he wouldn't talk to me at all until I signed an NDA, but wanted big money funding. Our general rule was we wouldn't sign anything unless we knew what for. So we managed to get a rough idea of what he wanted funding for. Turns out it was a perpetual motion machine that used magnets to spin a turbine. Exception, it had no way of extracting power from the system. My boss actually used the line on this project, "We obey the laws of thermodynamics." He never got his funding. Story 5. I work in the packaging industry, and I've lost count how many times a client requests something along the lines of, I want my package to be better. Hopefully I can get some good graphics printed on it, and I want it to be cheaper so I can raise my profit. So you want something better than your stapled together film wrap, but at the same time you want it to be cheaper. Story 6. Property wanted us to evaluate the condition of their boilers to determine the best course of action. What they really wanted was for us to say, you can fix those up for a few more years. Went out with a boiler inspector who condemned the boilers on the spot. We informed them the boilers were not safe at all to operate and needed replacement immediately. They wanted us to amend our report to say everything was okay. We refused, and they decided to stop contacting us. Story 7. Work in a wood shop. Once upon an age ago, a lady comes in and asks for a pine thingy for her yard. Guy she's talking to says no, pine will rot there, you'll need teak or something a bit more water resistant, especially if you're going to bury a bit of it. She was having none of it. 5 carpenters came over to explain to her how certain woods are better in wet areas. She wanted pine. Well, we had LOSB pine and CCA pine, but we weren't getting into this as we knew she'd come back in a few months back asking for a free repair or a refund. She didn't get her product from us, and I doubt she got anyone else to make it either. When 6 professionals come to you to say the exact same thing, maybe consider their words or at least just Google it. Story 8. Truss roof design. We had things like that all the time. It's odd having to tell an architect that the stamped blueprints still need to have weight transferred to the ground at some point. The worst I saw was a do-it-yourselfer that had almost completely removed 2 attic trusses, so they could make a bigger stairway, and wanted us to tell the inspector it was okay. Story 9. Defense contract. The sales engineer sold an optical rocket tracking system for use on a desert coastal test range, and it wasn't until I showed up for testing and started astronomical self-calibration that I realized. In the summer, the desert heat drives a standing dust cloud that starts at about 1 kilometer altitude and reaches about 2 kilometers altitude and flows outward until it precipitated into the sea a few km offshore. We could not see through it. It was impossible. The only time the system was usable was either very late at night or in the winter when the dust cloud went away. The system was useless. The sales dude did the site visit in the winter. Story 10, as a network engineer, the number of people who don't understand the speed of light as a pretty dang hard limit when it comes to network latency ping times. That is to say, the further you move the client away from a server, the higher the latency has to be. At one point, I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation of the speed of light through fiber and the distance between two of our data centers, and came out with 45 milliseconds as the absolute lower limit, if I could run a single uninterrupted strand of fiber across most of the US. I can't do that, of course, so the 60 milliseconds cross-country they were complaining about was really the best we could do. Similarly, as we move some data center services into the cloud of Azure or AWS, a lot of service owners seem unaware of how additional latency will slow them down until the move starts happening. Story 11 from a customer: why did your system fail? You said it would not fail due to a power outage. We did not have a power outage. Me correct. You did not have a power failure. Our system failed when it was electrically shorted due to excessive humidity. The server was under 6 of water. Story 12 was asked to print a set of blueprints IN scale from bad photographs. That would be like pouring water on a table and asking to make it stay in a square shape without using any barriers. Idiots. Story 13, architect wanted to use these specific high bays in a classroom setting. These fixtures were rated for 42,000 lumens each, which is essentially like harvesting the power of the sun to light a room with a 9 ceiling. They were confused when I told them that was a poor idea. Story 14, so an older neighborhood is being gentrified and a developer decides to get in on the act, buys 2 older one-story storefronts and plans to make them into one building for a restaurant bar. So far, so good. He hires a well-respected architect to design the space, and he decides not to remove the wall dividing the 2 old stores which share a common truss roof, but to remove parts of the wall to create windows and leave the wall portions between the windows as supports. Restaurant opens and isn't much of a success because that part of town is still sketchy. Restaurant fails and building stays empty for a year or so. New guy buys restaurant and decides he needs more space, so he hires new architect to do something about those windows in the center wall. New architect decides to remove the wall completely and replace it with circular iron columns for that retro steampunk look, and to keep up a little support for that old truss roof. This restaurant fails because the food was horrible. Third guy buys the restaurant and decides that those iron columns are ugly and takes them out on the advice of some builder who said that truss roof is good for that span after building inspector had oked the new work plan which indicated no change to the central supports. Builder was one of those guys who hires casual labor in the parking lot of a Home Depot. Sanitary inspector arrives 1 week before opening to check on kitchen, sees that the columns are gone, goes back to his office and calls building inspector, who rushes out to check on things, condemns building as unsafe. Third owner goes bankrupt, and the building was torn down about 6 months later. I watched all this from my office window and got inside reports from the owner of the bar next door. It was the most fun about that particular job. Story 15, my father is an electrician and was doing work at a Walmart and ran 5 circuits through one pipe. Walmart said he needed 5 because there was no way he could do 5 circuits in one pipe. After arguing with them for a half hour, he ran 5 pipes. Only one of them has wire in it. Story 16, the amount of main contractors upgrading pumping stations that needed to be told. Just doubling the size of the pumps is no good unless you also doubled the power supply was farcical. Try and pull 120A through a 100A fuse. See what happens. I would send at least one of Thess emails a month. They always reacted with surprise. Civil engineers, go dig your hole. None of the above, but I did work electrical at Menard's Midwest hardware store for a while. I do like to think I made a few contributions and prevented a few people from burning their houses down, like the geniuses who, having lost power, wanted to hook their generators up to the exterior outlets. I told them they could do that, and they would hear a pop followed by smoking plastic and rubber the second the power came back on. My favorite was the guy who wanted a warming lamp for a shower. He had his can and his bulb all ready to go when I asked what he was working on, as I looked at his supplies. Not only was the can not wet rated, but it was rated for only 75 watts. He wanted to put in a 250-watt incandescent bulb. I explained, using small words, that either his insulation, the frame of the floor above, or the can itself would catch fire or melt, and then he would have no shower and quite possibly melted plastic on his head. Sheesh. Story 17, general contractor here. A lot of people are just so delusional about what stuff costs. A lot of people have a budget that is just so inadequate for their project. A lot of times their budgets are kind of just pulled out of thin air, or they're using rule of thumb costs from like the 90s. I am very wary of any owner that hasn't had anything built before or recently. Don't want to have them waste a bunch of your time before the project is scrapped due to costs. Story 18. A potential customer gave us a very enthusiastic pitch for their unoriginal device. The unique selling point being that it would last like 10x longer on batteries than all the existing ones on the market, whilst being the same size, price, etc. When we asked how this miracle would be achieved, the answer was that we just buy a better battery, like Apple and Samsung and Tesla, etc., had never thought of just using a better battery in their products. Story 19. Hey, you know that old unit we've had you guys make for a decade which works perfectly fine? Well, we'd like to have a snazzy, updated version. We want more functionality, more controls, a built-in computer instead of simplistic basic controls, its own Wi-Fi, double the tank capacity, and make everything more compact. The old one did like one thing really well, so make this one do 3 different things at least. The old ones cost about $20,000, so we'd like the new one to cost less. There've been about 4 different meetings of them demanding this. Last I heard, there hasn't been any progress on the project. Story 20. Roughing and electrical in a block building. I made up a piece of pipe to go from a receptacle 18 above the floor and turn out of the block wall above the ceiling. The mason told me the pipe was above the roof. Double and triple check the plans. The ceiling was higher than the roof. Story 21. Chemist here. My company sells, among other things, windshield washer fluids to brick-and-mortar stores. One of our products is a 5-gram tablet that one can put in their car's windshield washer reservoir and fill with water, which will produce blue detergent solution for cleaning windshields. One big difference between the liquid and the tablet is the liquid can have varying amounts of methanol, which provides antifreeze capabilities by lowering the freezing point of the water-methanol mix. You need roughly 35 by volume methanol to get to the typical freezing point of -20°F. Enter sales marketing. They ask if we can develop a tablet that can make antifreeze claims. They still want the tablet form, and for it to weigh 5 grams. They tell us this would be a game changer, because it's expensive to ship water. I tell them it is not possible, because the amount of methanol 5 grams of tablet could encapsulate would in no way depress the freezing point of water in any appreciable way. They respond with, but it would be a game changer. Me to myself, if we can alter the laws of physics, I'll look into it. Over 2 years later, I still get questions about whether we can do it. Story 22. In a previous job, I was asked by a customer and my manager to design from scratch something that was way outside our wheelhouse. He was beholden to numerous fire safety codes and see already available from dozens of vendors. In more recent times, I've been told by internal customers that they didn't like the design of a medical device because of the color I chose to render it in SolidWorks. Story 23. I was once asked by my project manager to take 2 versions of the same document, about 25,000 words each, and compare them, highlighting the differences. Because he was not IT literate, his intention was naturally for me to do it manually, representing probably several full days of work at a time when we had other work coming in constantly. When I used the MS Word comparison tool and printed the document out with all the differences automatically formatted and highlighted, which took about 2 minutes rather than 2 days, he said I was trying to overperform and that I was overthinking it. Story 24. When someone calls my shop wanting to sell me advertising on a non-digital billboard, newspaper, etc., I tell them I'll do it only if they put an animated GIF on it. Story 25. Civil engineer here. A colleague once had to do the statics analysis of a huge reinforced concrete hammock an architect designed inside a living room of a family house. Story 26. Does IT count as well? Had a user wanting us to create a share folder for them on the shared drive that was beyond borked. She wanted users A, C, and D to have access on weekdays, and users B and E to have access on the weekend. On top of this, she wanted everyone to have access after business hours. She raised the biggest stink in the world when we told her that this was no possible in Active Directory. Before anyone shows me how I am wrong, and it is possible, let me rephrase it. It was too much work, and I refused to do it. Story 27. I want you to make a program that anyone can log into for golfing. It keeps track of their scores and sends them to a database. No, I can't find a server. Why would you need one? Story 28. Going over an electrical single-line diagram for a project, I noticed the building has a 240V single-phase electrical service. Through some magic, the other end of the line had a 208V 3-phase panel. I had to call the engineer to ask where I should find the other wire. Story 29. I worked on a giant, complicated system for a government agency that pulled polluted groundwater out of the ground, sprayed it into the air, making it into air pollution. But I digress, then pumping the clean water back into the ground. They wanted to control the spray system from the state capital city, so an expensive remote system that worked over the phone lines was installed. There's a lot of summertime thunderstorms, so a lightning detector was installed to protect the remote system from lightning strikes by sensing an approaching storm, taking the whole system down in a controlled fashion and disconnecting everything from the phone lines. The thunderstorms also often knocked out the power, so after that a gigantic backup generator was installed, a system almost the size of a railroad boxcar. The generator was immensely expensive, but was finally installed completely. During a meeting, my business partner said why is there a generator for the system when the lightning detection system has already taken the whole system down and shut everything off? Dead. Freaking silence. Well, you bring up a good point there. That's something we're going to have to look at. Story 30, I worked for a small traditional upholstery company. The owner was an antique dealer interior designer type with no formal qualifications and definitely not a traditional upholsterer, definitely a chancer. Some of our clients were world-famous designers. He promised a design that was impossible. He just couldn't understand that you can't float springs on thin air, but insisted that we make it. It was a very long time ago, so as I recall the frame had been made, but without any ability to put webbing where we needed to, which is what you usually tie the springs. The company ceased trading not long after. Story 31, not a customer, but the boss who couldn't understand basics of welding and fab. When I was in college, I took a job. I knew 2 minutes into the interview that this guy was at least 90 BS. But I was broke, and he was the only one that even came close to offering me any kind of engineering-related or CAD work. And he was flexible with my school schedule, so I figured I'd build my resume and put some cash in my pocket. He wanted to build custom stair rails in the shop so that they could be pulled off the truck and bolted into place. No problem, as long as it's built right. Think of a straight stair rail as a giant, almost parallelogram picture frame, with the ends of each part miter cut to fit together nicely. Nearly every set of stairs is different, and almost every joint is custom. So the miter cuts for one particular 10 section wound up being 4 totally random angles, something like 57 for 124, 152, 7, 125, 8. Now you have to understand, this is a guy who claimed to have been a welder fabricator for over 20 years and been building custom handrails for almost 10 years at that point. I hand him the cut sheet and assembly drawing. He tells me to not bother with decimals, and I tell him that's fine, but you'll have some slightly larger gaps. No problem. I can just weld those closed, which makes sense since at less than 2 inches, those angles are tiny. I get a text the following morning with a pic showing one of the joints terribly misaligned by over an inch and asking why my drawing is wrong. Turns out that Einstein cut the 4 pieces, welded parts 1 and 2, then 2 and 3, then 3 and 4, then gets to the bad joint at 1 and 4, and is all confused why it's not fitting together. I try to explain the concept of tolerances to him, but he just couldn't understand that 125 8 is actually somewhere between 125, 75, and 125, 84. So the far end 10 away could move anywhere in more than a 316 range, never mind that he ignored the decimals. Add that up over 3 joints. Made even worse when it could also twist in the 3rd dimension, and you'll never get the parts to fit if you weld one joint at a time. He also didn't think the draw from heating and cooling would be any issue. A few other things he couldn't understand: steel flexes under a load. He wanted a rig to lift and move a 900 pounds attachment for the Hebo. He didn't believe me when I told him that the main horizontal tube would flex about 14 under that load. My first time getting to use that strengths and materials class, and we would need to add some bracing to hold everything together. 20 years as a welder. A curved rail needs to twist as it follows the radius of the stairs, or one end will not mate up with the next section. I showed him physical examples of it not working the way he tried it, and then pulled up YouTube videos showing how his equipment is able to do it correctly. He still didn't understand why it didn't work when made as a simple flat radius. 10 years building rails. I only worked for Jimmy for about a month, for what I can tell. It was more a case of him burning some family money trying to turn a hobby into a business, and him trying to fake it till he made it. He had to have spent close to $1 million on all that very nice metalworking equipment. TLDR, idiot boss claims to be a 20-year expert in the welding field, but can't understand basic manufacturing or fabrication concepts of tolerances, beam deflection, or welding draw. Story 32, no, you can't connect 10 servers and 12 switches and 3000 watt UPSs to a single 220V 15 amp connection. We need to bring the electrician back, and I need work with, and we will most likely need a new breaker panel as well, since this is an old building and panel looks full. Story 33, true story. Mega rich couple are building a new 25,000 square foot house. 18 months into the project, their interior designer begins adding very heavy elements to the plans that the structure is not engineered for. Tempers flare, a new structural engineer is hired. At this point, the house is ready for sheetrock roof, is on, etc. New engineer raises doubts, here we go, that the structure is built per specifications and undergone proper materials testing and inspections. Despite what the records show, owner's lawyer up, builder lawyers up, Destructive testing is agreed to determine the integrity of the foundation, which fails 5 of the cores taken. Settlement ensues. Owner has the whole house torn down and has the excavation filled in, walked away. Story 34, the salesman actually would not refuse this, and I am more specialty souring than the producer, but it fits. Customer's engineering department designed their own screw ug itself. Originally, it was a very odd thread former in steel with organic coating, because that is more weather resistant than zinc plate. They found the coating was being damaged by the newly formed threads, and there was rust on that part of the screw that came out the other side. Complaints were made, and we explained that it was basically unavoidable with these materials, so they sent a new print calling 300 series stainless. I explained to sales that 300 series will not work in their application as it is too soft to form thread in the sheet metal, and went refused and sent it back. I source out some standard but specialty fasteners that are made especially for these situations by metal. Customer shoots that down as it is much more expensive and not their special odd design. They come back with a new revision of the print now, in 410 stainless. I explained to sales that 410 is not corrosion resistant. I don't know how hard he pushes this info to customer, but not hard enough. They order 410, I push back sales to no result. I send an order for 410 to the MFG. The MFG is the same that made the steel organic coating, and I have brainstormed with engineers there about the application and issues. They call me back and say, WTF, this isn't going to work in the application. I tell that I know, but customer produced the print and refuses to listen about it. We do it all in CNR per customer print. The customer accepts the parts, and I hold my breath waiting for the other shoe to drop. The part comes up for reorder, and we lose the business to a lower offer. Thank God, I think. Sometime later I hear from sales that our competition at that customer is out of favor. He tells me that the business we lost is now having failures in the field with corrosion on the parts from a new vendor, and they're refusing to share any of the cost for the failure with the customer. Of course, the salesman is all thrilled and still does not understand that our parts must be included in this until I remind him. Now, that customer must have poor lot control, because there is no way that our parts did not fail as well. However, the chemistry being what it is, the 410 parts would have taken longer to corrode than the steel scratch organic parts, but the 410 would have much more corrosion overall. So the end user complained about a little corrosion, and worse, they are seeing significantly more corrosion than what they originally complained of. But there was such a gap before the complaints, it is attributed to the more recent parts. My suspicion is that while the corrosion showed up after the competitor's parts were in the field, but it was probably our parts that were noticed, the customer looks up the currently selected vendor and calls them to discuss the issue. The competition listens and then tells them that yes, of course, 410 corrodes, and what did they expect when they drew the print up? So they don't dig any further into tracing the origin of which particular parts that were reported. I don't really have those details, but that makes the most sense. I don't know what the end result is with customer versus competitor, but I do know our customer lost all their contracts for that application. It wasn't their main business, at least. They were trying to break into that industry, which is a high-growth industry at the time. They were actually making inroads, and now they're not doing anything there at all. So we were lucky that no bad was splashed on us. But it is frustrating that sales had all the information and took such a risk. I actually tried to get other people involved to support refusing the order. 100 the customer should have gone by metal screws. It would have been a margin hit. Maybe they could even have convinced the end user that complained about the steel organic to help. But honestly, what percentage of the BOM cost is fasteners? You can triple the fastener cost and still have a very profitable contract, probably more than triple. If they had done this, they would still be present in a growing industry. Story 35. I was once asked to proceed forward with a drop ceiling set 4 from the finished floor above, because that should be enough for beams and wires and pipes. I was once asked if our firm could do a small commercial kitchen for less than a quarter of what it would cost all, while the guy griped that it was unnecessary that he should have to build a fire-rated wall or hire engineers for his structural work. But none of that beats the time I was given a set of schematic drawings by an owner, drawn up by freelancer, to proceed into design development. And somehow neither one noticed that the stairs from one floor to the next were not even in the same location. Story 36. I restore vintage campers, mostly Airstreams, and my biggest thing always comes down to consumers being clueless over cost. Specifically, our flashiest camper restoration was valued just over $150,000. Of course, everyone who comes in for a consult uses that as their reference, would like you to do X in hours just like you did on that one. But our budget for the whole project is $30,000. See why that doesn't work. Story 37. Once we got an order for some stainless steel tubes with overlapping ID and OD tolerances, but no called out wall thickness. We sent them an empty box, and they sent us a revised print. Story 38. My dad was the supervising builder on a site where they were building a house on a massive hill. He took one look at the plans and told the architects that it wasn't going to work. They told him to off. We're architects. We know what we're doing. The foundations ending up sliding down the hill. Took a ton of time and money to fix the mistake, caused the architects didn't think the lowly builder knew what he was talking about. Story 39. I work for a large financial institution, and we've had multiple members ask us to update our mobile app to allow them to deposit cash and not just checks. Story 40. I'm an electrical engineer, designing power systems for buildings. Once a client requested an outlet that would sense whatever voltage and phase combination the thing you plugged in required and adjust its output as needed. It was really hard to find a way to explain that such a thing does not exist without implying they're an idiot. Story 41. Fiber artist here. I had designed a neck warmer in the shape of a bias strip. It was a fairly complex piece of work because it was actually two interlinked bias strips, one white and one blue. Each was an open work design, so the opposing colors showed through the gaps. Hey Race, a picture of it was showing it to an acquaintance who said, "You should make it blue on one side and white on the other side. It's a bias strip," I replied, so he repeated his suggestion more slowly because he thought I hadn't understood him. Story 42, slightly off prompt. But hey Race, a funny story. My old man is an engineer who, while generally a great man, has zero respect for any architects in our town after some of the things he's seen. Growing up, he always told us any architect can make look pretty on paper, but all it takes is one engineer to tell them the design won't stand. So far, his favorite rag on the architect story involves an architect who designed an elaborate basement for prospective homeowners in Tornado Alley. When presented with said architect's final blueprint, Dad pointed out that without stairs or a door to the outside, they were never going to see the basement, let alone use it. Architect was not impressed. Story 43. I design HVAC for new residential construction. I can't legally call myself an engineer until I pass my PE test, which I'm taking in April. Wish me luck. Although neither of these are impossible requests by a customer per se, I do find them amusing and frustration one. The majority of our warranty calls come from homeowners who bought a house and complain that they think their heating and/or cooling equipment is too small. They always come to this conclusion in one of two ways. Either they know someone in the HVAC business who took a look at the size of their home and their equipment and made the conclusion, or they Googled something like size of AC per square foot. Some background: it used to be that they sized heating, cooling equipment off of rules of thumb and always oversized them so that they would not get warranty calls. However, since 1996, we are now required to do thermal load calculations in order to determine the size of the equipment. Furthermore, insulation and fenestration has improved drastically since the early 90s. That means that you can't compare the size of equipment in old homes with what you think should be in your new home. You pay for a more energy-efficient home after all. You also can't size equipment off of square footage. There are a ton of factors that determine the thermal load in your building: insulation, fenestration, ambient conditions, building geometry, orientation, building tightness, etc. For example, if you built two identical homes, but one was in Phoenix, Arizona, and one was in Anchorage, Alaska, then you would not expect them to have the same air conditioner size. Usually what happens is that we do an airflow and temperature test in the home. We find that in 90 of the cases, the system is able to get the rooms up to the design temperature using the small equipment that was specified too. We had a particularly difficult customer who was always looking for things to complain about, especially the HVAC. He called warranty in a huff and demanded that we fix the vent in his laundry room. He apparently did the tissue paper test in order to determine if the register was blowing any air and the tissue did not move. He then removed the grill and was surprised angry to find that it was not connected to any ductwork. He sent over a picture via email. It was the transfer grill to allow combustion air into the laundry in case you had a gas dryer. I can kind of understand though, because designing HVAC is almost like witchcraft until you get the hang of it. You also have a lot of people who have been designing mechanical systems for many years who are set in their ways and all have a different opinion. Most people could not care less about their HVAC in their home unless it was giving them issues. Story 44. Hydroelectric turbines in the CA aqueduct. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the aqueduct is pumped uphill and he wanted to put hydro turbines downstream from there. Story 45. I feel like I'm that bad customer at the moment. I need to replace a piece of equipment with one with 10 higher capacity under worse feed conditions while still sitting in the same footprint. There's a very narrow band of things that can be altered to make this possible, and it may not be. I want to express to them that I'm not deeply entrenched, and that if they can't do it, they can say that openly, and change other parameters to find something that works. But so far, I've just gotten radio silence out of them. as if they're debating how to respond to my stupidity internally before replying, "Oh, zero." Story 46 work in fire protection, designing sprinkler systems. They refused to give a water supply at tender. So we sized our pipe as per a similar building with a similar hazard classification in the area. We kept hounding them about it into the project, and they were having problems getting approval from the city for it. The consultant eventually gives us numbers to go off of which didn't at all fit our current design. So we make some changes based off that. Not a huge deal, but still a bit of an extra. The real numbers finally come in, and it's not good. Everything needs to come up, and it's about 15 to 20 more expensive than the original contract amount. Luckily, our estimator was very honest in his pricing, because there was just a huge storm on why the does pipe one size bigger take that many more hours to put in. Well, when you cut the pipe, it goes around in the circle at the same speed. It just takes more time. It's heavier, so slower to put in, and all the fittings and sizes for everything cost a little more, because they're a little bigger. After about 3 or 4 very detailed cost breakdowns and comparisons, they accepted it after we took like $1,000 off the price. We asked for the information, told you there may be a price change, told you we needed the information, and proved that the information you gave us was, and you're still fighting us on it this much. I should charge you for all the time I spend on emails, FFS. Story 47 once had a client who was very into renewable energy and wanted all the lights in their car park to be powered with renewables. They, however, hated solar panels because they are too ugly. They instead wanted a geothermal plant. In an attempt to demonstrate the impossibility of this exercise, I roughly did the calculations for how deep we would need to dig in that part of Australia. We don't have an active volcano on the entire mainland, 12 kilometers deep. A 12 kilometers deep hole, and subsequent power station to power the lights for a 100-car parking lot. Needless to say, they didn't get what they wanted.